Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 13 of the AFL season was a dead set ripper. If you got the feeling over the weekend that we were having a tight round of footy, you were spot on. 6 of the 8 games were decided by a single-digit margin, which is a record. It was a real treat to catch the footy this weekend, with so many tight games filled with heroes, controversies, and unpredictable finishes. It really was a weekend like I probably can't even remember. As a Crows man, it started in spectacular fashion, with Adelaide just holding off Geelong in a thriller in Adelaide. But every night that followed continued. Friday night, Hawks and the Bulldogs was a cracking game of footy. And then Saturday night, we had Port Adelaide get their revenge on the Eagles, holding them off in a tight one. Sunday night, Carlton coming from behind to beat the Bombers in a close one. It just kept going and going and going. And then it finished in fantastic style with Big Freeze 12, with the D's holding off the Pies in the King's birthday clash, which was a very fitting tribute to the great Neil Danaher. The only 2 lopsided games for the whole round was Brisbane surprisingly easing past Gold Coast and Freo recording the biggest win in their history over a desperately disappointing North Melbourne. So what a round of footy, hey? But how was your fantasy weekend? Mine? Frustrating. In my home league, Finders Keepers, we have 8 sides, so the top 4 play finals. And I've been stuck in 5th spot for, it feels like the whole season. And every time I have a chance to jump into 4th, I stuff it up somehow. And I had a chance this weekend, but just lost convincingly, didn't even get near it. Now, I played off in the grand final last year, which at the time felt a bit premature for my list. And that's starting to sort of ring true because I've got a long injury list. My depth is really being tested. And it's just frustrating. And it's a keeper league. You're not going to be at the top forever. But I really want my team to be like Geelong or Sydney, always contending, always in the finals. I don't want to bottom out. But anyway, there's still a long way to go. So I'll keep going. I'll keep on keeping on even. All right, let's have a look at my waiver picks from last week. But before I do that, actually, just going to flag now, I don't have a whole bunch of waiver suggestions for this week because the pod's out a little later because of the public holiday. Most leagues' waivers will have come and gone. So I've got a few names I'll tell you at the end, but I haven't done a whole list like a regular round. So last week I had 7 names covering off deep, regular and deeper leagues. I didn't love them. From memory, I certainly wasn't enthused about anyone. More just guys to keep an eye on, if anything. But let's have a look at how they went anyway. The first guy, actually, I was pretty happy with. Billy Wilson. He was owned in 37% of Keeper and Dynasty leagues on the Keeper Fantasy platform a week ago. And after his 90 the week before, that shot up to 57% ownership for this week. And he backed it up. He put up another 82 to go with that 90, played a very nice role at half-back, and he's looking really good. I like this kid a lot. So, if you grabbed him, I think you'll be pretty happy with that one. The next guy, not so much. Peter Laddams for Sydney. His ownership was 57%. It went down to 53 because a week ago it seemed obvious that he'd be out for Grundy, but I did feel like there was a chance the Swans would play both of them, just coming up against the 2 St Kilda rucks. But I was wrong. Laddams was out, didn't play, and if you did jump on him, I'm sure you've already ditched him by now. The next guy was Ryan Burns for St Kilda. His ownership was all the way down at 18%. That went up to 26% on the back of a really good game the week before. And he had the same role playing on the wing, and he just didn't get as much ball and scored a 54. So, back to probably what we are used to seeing with Burns, but I did like him the week before. I reckon he's got a fantasy game in him. he's just been out of it for so long. So we'll see what happens there. Ruben Jinby was another guy I mentioned, and I'm so disappointed for this guy. He went from 38% ownership to 45%. He scored a 50, but he was on 50. It was in the third quarter. He went down with a quad injury, which looks to be a pretty nasty one. So, yeah, it's such a shame. He was really doing what he did the week before. His scoring has been, he scored a heap of 60s, then he scored 79 last week, and he was on track to beat that this week before the injury hit. It's such a shame. He looks so good. I love that he's starting to add more of an attacking element to his game, and that's where his fantasy points are going to come from. Blake Acres I had next. He came back into the side last week and looked really good on the wing. His ownership went from 45% up to 61%, and those who jumped on would be stoked. He scored a nice ton on the weekend and was very important for Carlton. Now, the next two guys I put in is just guys to keep an eye on. You know, jump on them if you're in a super deep league, but I just wanted you to keep an eye on him. Bailey McDonald for Hawthorn. I really like the look of him. His ownership went from 6% down to 5%, so people jumped off. But he scored a 49, so obviously his scoring isn't there. But I love the look of him, and I think he's going to be a bit of a mainstay in that back six for the Hawks. At least in the future. I hope he holds his spot for a little while longer, because I really like watching him play. And then the other guy was Job Shanahan for West Coast. He scored 55. Again, not someone you'd have on field, but every time I watch West Coast, he sticks out. And he's a little quieter in this game, but he's going to be an absolute gun. So for this week, most people have already submitted their waivers, but there's three guys that I did like. So if they're still sitting there, maybe just go grab them. The first one is Patrick Voss for Fremantle. He, before the waivers, he was owned in 36% of leagues, and he's had a massive 4 weeks, really big one on the weekend, scoring 124, which is going to catch a lot of people's attention. So I'd say a lot of people grabbed him. But this wasn't one out of the box. That's a big 4 weeks now. He's averaging 4 goals a game and 92 fantasy points in that time. And he's just been building. The only thing with Freo is they've got a few of these guys. It's hard to know which is going to be the one to jump on, because obviously Josh Tracy's already broken out. He's already very fieldable. But yeah, Voss is coming, and he's a good player to watch. He likes a bit of a biffo, and he likes to stir the pot, and he's bloody good. He's getting up the ground a lot more now, which is certainly helping his scoring. The next guy is someone I talked about nearly every week for the first half of last year, and Sam De Koning for Geelong. He played as the ruckman on the weekend and scored 90. So, it's hard to sort of jump on him. He was owned in 36% of leagues. I would jump on him, but I'd want to see Geelong's lineup for this weekend, because if they're bringing their ruck back, De Koning goes to the back line. But he looked better, and he did. I heard even the commentary team sort of talking about how he played really well in the ruck. So I wonder if Geelong put him there and leave him there for a stint. Anyway, if you get any sense that that's what they're going to do, grab him, because with defender status, he is very handy as a number 1 ruck. And then the last one for the Bulldogs is Arthur Jones. He was owned in 13% of leagues, scored 66 on the weekend, and that's probably as high as he's going at the minute. But I've always liked him. He shows a lot when you watch the Doggies, but he played a bit more up on the wing, up the ground this week, and I think it's smart for the Bulldogs to get him around the footy, up the ground, because he makes things happen. So his scoring isn't quite there at the minute, but I wonder what he could develop into. Artie Jones for the Doggies. So there's 3 names to consider, and I'll get back to a regular list next week. All right, let's have a look at round 13 and the things I noticed from a fantasy point of view, a keeper league point of view. I'll roll through the 8 games, and then I'll get to some listener questions. And I've got a heap this week, which is awesome. I've got some trades to look at. Should be a bit of fun. So I'll get to that shortly. But for now, let's go back to Thursday night. Adelaide and Geelong. Brilliant game of footy. Cats probably wasted their chances. The Crows rode their luck. But in the end, it was a 1-point win and a really important win for the Crows, who were missing some players in that last quarter and just really needed the win to hopefully kickstart their season in the second half of the year. And for Geelong, that's back-to-back tight losses. I don't think they've done a lot wrong the last couple of weeks, the Cats. Big test for them Friday night, though, against the Suns. But yeah, this was a great game. And for the Crows, Dan Curtin played his best game of the year by a mile. He scored 95, had 26 touches playing on the wing. He didn't have any CBAs, just wing up and down the ground. And what was a wet game at times, he looked so clean. It's a really good sign for the Crows to see Curtin, back to some of the form we saw in 2025. And certainly for those who've held him in keepers, that 95 is really nice and hopefully just the start of a big second half of the year for Dan Curtin. Lachie McAndrew had his highest score of the season with a 128, and he just keeps getting it done, the ruckman, and he just loves the wet. He really does play well in the wet. 51 hit-outs, 7 tackles. What a find for the Crows. Now, Hugo Hall-Kahan debuted, and if I was listening to this 2 weeks ago, I would have said, who on earth is that? He was picked up in the mid-season draft just recently, and 7 days later was named for the Crows, which really surprised me. But they obviously like what they saw, and with Isaac Cumming injured or re-injured, they needed someone to play a similar role. And Hall-Kahan looked great. He was so clean, even in the wet. He scored 51. So he showed his skills, but he also showed he's got some ticker, because he copped a massive head clash with Toby Murray. It was shocking. He had blood coming out of his nose. I thought he'd broken his nose or something. Anyway, I thought he was done for the day, for the night, and the Crows were in all sorts, because there was only one man on the bench at that stage. But he got stitched up, came back out, and he played the game out, and he had some really important moments, and late in the game there was a big tackle. So him coming back was probably the difference in what was a 1-point win when the Crows had so few rotations. So a heck of a debut. I don't think he'll forget that in a hurry. And more importantly, for keeper leagues, he looked really good, and I can't see him losing his spot anytime soon. I mean, even when Cummings back, he showed more than enough to suggest he's up to it. Josh Rochelle and Jake Saligo were back into the CBA mix with 40% and 48% respectively. Rochelle scored 69, not amazing. Saligo 81, bit of an improvement on what he's been doing lately. Yeah, but just interesting to see them back into the mix. And I guess it's a bit of a watch next week, although Rankin's not going to be back next week. But yeah, just an interesting watch when Rankin's back, how they include all of them in that mix. For Geelong, Sam De Koning, as I said earlier, played as the main ruck, had 25 touches but only 1 mark. And the 1 mark doesn't surprise me, it was very wet, but 25 touches is so impressive for a big man. I'd love to see him just become a ruckman, because I'd be trying to grab him ASAP in every league I play. Paddy Dangerfield did his usual turning back the clock against the old mob. I tell you, I watch him play and I think, I reckon he's probably just about done. Then he plays Adelaide and they release him as a main CBA midfielder, and he looks bloody good again. He scored 102 and he was huge for the Cats, particularly in the first half. And then last guy is Connor O'Sullivan with an 84, and that's 3 scores in the 80s in a row now for him. And maybe his time is here. I've really liked him for a little while and thought, not yet, maybe in a couple of years. But 380s in a row, and he's just looking more assured every time I watch him. And I just saw Tom Stewart will miss next week, so opportunity for O'Sullivan to maybe go 4 in a row with the good scores. On to Friday night, and the Bulldogs held off the Hawks in a cracker. Now, Will Day for Hawthorn, second game back, and I talked about him last week, how he didn't do a lot, but you could see just in the glimpses what they were missing, and he did it again. But this time he scored a ton. 115, thanks to 25 touches, 8 tackles, and just really showcasing what they've been missing. And good to see him out there racking it up again. Joe Newcomb had a massive game, and he had such a big game. He was so dominant. One of his better games, certainly for the year. But it kind of summed him up as a fantasy guy as well. So 36 touches he had, and he scored 114, which is, great. But he was so dominant. I saw so much of him. I thought he was on track for a whopper, but, he's certainly more impact than accumulation. But 36 touches on the night, and, I thought he was just about their best player. For the Bulldogs, Bailey Dale put up 125 on the back of 36 touches, 6 marks and a goal. And after a pretty slowish start to the first, I want to say third of the season, since then he's really starting to get going, and this was a big one for him. Interesting, Connor Buderick only scored like in the 30s, I think, so he was completely out of it, and it was all Bailey Dale. So Dale owners will be hoping that we see more of that for the next half of the year. And then lastly, Artie Jones, who I did talk about before, scored his 66. He's just great to watch, and he spent some time up the ground on the wing, as I said earlier. On to Saturday, and North played Freo in WA as a North home game. Didn't really pan out the way they hoped. I had this game on in the background at home, and I think every time I looked over, North would sort of peg them back, and they were hanging around. And then next time I looked, it was like 100-point difference. So North completely stopped scoring, and Freo just put the full throttle, and they're really charging Freo to September, which is exciting for them. For North Melbourne, Colby McKercher played mostly midfield, which looked really good early. He wasn't scoring a heap, but he was in everything. Lots of little handballs here and there, but hard to really get a read of any North scores. He, like everyone in his team, just disappeared after a decent start. He scored a 56, and, Finn O'Sullivan was out. I'm just trying to work out why McKercher's gone into the midfield. I know he's going to end up a midfielder. I don't know. They just keep moving him around. Like, just put him at halfback and let him just have a whole year of patrolling the back line, getting confident, scoring fantasy points for us. But you know what I mean? Like, he goes forward, and then they put him back, and you think, here we go. And then this week he's an on-baller. So, I don't know. I reckon they just need to stick with a position for him. But that's just me. Cooper Trembath scored 81, and he was everywhere at times in this game. I've really liked this guy. He's had a very quiet, probably 5 or 6 weeks, but this was much, much better. And I think they really like his spring in the centre ball ups, because he attended 10 of them in this game. But then they used Cherry's grunt around the ground at the other ruck contest. So Trembath has been taking a lot of CBAs. It's very interesting. Speaking of Tristan Sherry, look, he scored 62. He just didn't look right. I reckon that first quarter and a half was maybe the worst I've seen him play. He just looks no chance against Jackson. And he had a bit of a potential head knock or concussion issue at training, I think. So I don't know if that affected him, but he was way off. Really interesting, though, to see that this was the third week in a row Sherry has heavily shared the CBAs with Trembath or Dawson. So he was only at, he's at under 60% of the CBAs this week. So I wonder how much of that is to do with form and how he's going versus, like I said before, maybe they just like Trembath as someone more agile for the middle. Either way, as a Sherry owner in my keeper league, it's pretty annoying. I just want to see him, the number one ruck, playing 15 tackles a game again, please. For Freo, look, everyone had a good game, but a couple of standouts. Hayden Young, this was his first game back in a few weeks. He's been very stop-start this season. In fact, his last few seasons have been like that. But yeah, very warmly received ton for owners. Scored a 101. Didn't have a heap of time on ground, maybe in the 60s, but kicked a couple of goals and, was just at his dynamic best. He's such a gun. 55% of the CBAs, but he's definitely spending time forward. So just need him to stay on the park, and I've got a good feeling he's going to get forward status this year. And lastly, Neil Erasmus, he posted his first ton since round 18, 2023. And that was the game that made me think Erasmus is going to be huge, because that was against the Pies at the G, I think. I've always noticed him since that day. And, he's never really had a huge go at it since. Lots of sub-affected games in the years gone past. Now, he's had plenty of opportunity this year, but not a heap on the ball. But with no Sarong and no Johnson, there was a few more opportunities for him. And, he scored a 114. Worth noting that he laid 10 tackles to get to that 114, though. So, I don't know. If he ever plays pure on ball, hot damn, but I just don't think it's going to happen for him. Not at this point with Freo's midfield the way it is. On to Saturday twilight, and we had the Q clash, and it was a real big opportunity for Gold Coast to get a big one over their older brothers Brisbane, because the Lions have been struggling, but Brisbane jumped out of the gate. I think it was 4-0 to start, and Gold Coast were playing catch up from that point, and obviously fell short by 31 points. Now for the Suns, John Noble, oh boy, crazy numbers. He scored 146, and 4 of his last 5 scores have been over 120, and 2 of them over 140. So he is absolutely dominating that back line, and I think he gets up to the wing at times as well, because he only took 2 kick-ins, so it's not like he's doing it all from the kick-ins. He's probably taken a lot of marks from the kick-ins. In fact, he took 15 marks for the game. So, I don't know, it felt like this was just going to be a few weeks of silly scores from him, but he just keeps going. And, there's a bit of, Archie Roberts earlier this year about him. Someone that maybe we didn't expect to really hit the ceiling like he has been, but he absolutely is doing it. So happy days if you're a John Noble owner. Ned Moyle, this was his 5th game in a row this season, but it was the first time he was the preferred ruck over Witts, so he actually had more ruck time than Witts for the first time. Scored 71, and he's just putting along nicely, I reckon. And if you've got shares in Moyle and you're wanting bigger scores, don't worry, he's just building nicely. And at some point, could be the end of this year, maybe next, Witts will retire, and that will be Moyles, and he's going to be a gun. Speaking of guns, Logan Morris, this was a career game from him. Career high fantasy score and career high 7 goals he kicked. And the Suns just had no answer for him. I saw they had, I reckon, 4 different players had a go at trying to stop him, and he just brushed them all off on the way to a nice 128, if you don't mind. Over to Brisbane, who won the game, and Darcy Wilmot, he's just continuing his excellent run in the absence of Dane Zorko. So Zorko's missed the 4 weeks now, and in that time Wilmot's gone 110, 99, 125 and now 103. Very nice. And still a while before Zorko's back too. Now, Jasper Fletcher is an interesting player to talk about because he's not thriving in Zorko's absence. Not at all. He scored 40 in this game and he didn't take a mark for the whole game. Now, that's only the second time in his career he's gone a whole game without taking a mark. And it got me thinking, he hasn't missed a game since debuting back in 2023. So that's 81 games in a row, which is remarkable when you consider the side that he joined and how successful they've been. I just wonder if maybe he needs a break. Maybe he needs to go back to the twos, and I don't know, but his form has been, it certainly hasn't been there. Certainly in a fantasy sense, Brisbane fans might be shaking their head thinking he's been fine, but certainly the fantasy scoring, he's dropped right off. And anyway, we'll wait and see. Saturday night, West Coast and Port Adelaide, and this was another very close one, and Port Adelaide did enough to just hold off the Eagles, who had Jake Waterman absolutely dominating. This was his second massive game in a row, Waterman. He scored 119 and he was just so dominant in the air, taking 11 marks. And he kicked 3 goals in this game, and he's done that 6 times this year. He's kicked 4 once. It's just a matter of time before he kicks a bag like 6, 7, 8 goals. When he's in the form he was in this game, absolutely marking everything, just not converting. You watch. One day he's going to kick an absolute bag, Waterman. Ruben Jinby, spoke about him earlier. Scored his 50 from 56% time on ground and was looking the goods before that quad injury. So, that's a real shame. For Port Adelaide, Joe Richards has been in pretty good form, and he's actually seen some midfield time in recent weeks. In this game, though, went up to 48% CBAs, and he benefited from that with an 82. He's a big tackler for a little guy. He's a really big tackler, and I really like Richards. I think he's building nicely. Jason Burgoyne scored 97, and Kane Farrell was out of the side, so I wonder if Burgoyne, maybe he picked up some of those half-back numbers. But this is certainly where we want him in fantasy. We want him at half-back, and we want that defender status for him. He's a tricky player because he has half-back. He plays half-back, has that defender status, but he also plays wing, so he could lose it at any time. Tricky one. Great player, though. Sunday Arvo footy saw Sydney and St Kilda in another very tight game, and Saints fans, I feel for you. Saints were 33 points up against, the high-flying Swans in Sydney. Couldn't hold them off. Sydney came back and won it with one of the last kicks of the game, Jai Sarong. Painful stuff for the Saints, but really big from Sydney, and they're right up there with Freo, aren't they, as the two most fancied to make the grand final. So for the Swans, it was Jai Sarong who came up clutch with the last-minute winner. Scored 100 thanks to 28 touches and 8 marks, playing on the wing. And I've spoken about him before, but what a pickup. Coming from Hawthorn, and all I knew about him was that he was a key defender, but Swans have put him on the wing and he's been excellent. Averaging 77 now, which is, very impressive. Speaking of impressive, Isaac Heaney is often quite impressive, and he was again. I mean, he copped the Marcus Windhager tag, which can be pretty tight, but he fought through it. 30 touches, 6 tackles, 2 goals, 110. He's really having a big year, is Heaney. For the Sainers, Rowan Marshall's starting to put up some good numbers again. And with that forward status, he's obviously not doing what he does as a main ruck, but he's starting to put up some pretty good fieldable scores as a forward, and I think it's just going to keep building. So he scored 101, and it's been a tough year for Rowan Marshall owners in keeper leagues since DeConning arrived, but slowly but surely things are improving. And then Max Hall, who is flying. He's now averaging 99 in his last 5, which coincides with his move into the midfield. Scored 108 in this game, and I'm just waiting to see if anything changes and he ends up out of that midfield again. But Wanganeen Miller was back this week. He played a lot of midfield and it didn't affect Hall's spot at all. So, maybe he's just staying there. Now, Mateus Filippo had a bit of a head scratcher of a game, if I'm honest. I've watched him this year. He's looked pretty good at times, starting to build, but it's just hard to understand how he scored 15 in this game. He had 78% time on ground, but only found the footy 4 times. Very strange. And I wonder what happens with him next week, because I don't know, does he go back to the VFL, or do they just say, no, it was just one of those days, he just couldn't get near it? I don't know why he's not more up the ground and around the ball. Anyway, let's see what they do with him in the next game. Sunday night we had the caretaker clash. Essendon and Carlton did battle, and both sides coached by caretakers at the minute, with Brad Scott and Michael Voss no longer at the club in recent weeks. And as is the theme for round 13, this was a really close, enjoyable game. Really hard to pick who was going to win it. Bombers looked good early, but Carlton pegged them back, and what's that, 4 wins in a row now for the Blues? Geez, baggers, they're coming. They are coming hard. For the Bombers, Zach Merritt, hugely relevant role change, played the whole game at halfback. Racked it up as he does, scored 126. Don't think he was that effective. I mean, he had some pretty shocking moments in that last quarter, but I don't know. This makes sense to me in big picture sort of setup for the Bombers, to move Merritt out of the middle, get him at half back where he can just sort of control things and give some midfield minutes to those younger guys, and that's exactly what happened in this game. Setterfield isn't young, but he got more of a look. Sam Durham, I'll talk about him in a minute. He had a huge look at the midfield, and Elijah Sardis as well. You got Jai Caldwell to come back in a couple of weeks. You've got Darcy Parish to return at some point. I think it makes sense for Merritt to play at half back. And then for Zach Merritt owners, defender status next year, thank you very much. And then he probably gets to Hawthorn and he's a midfielder again. So, now, Sam Durham, let me talk about this guy for a sec. What a game. That first half was just dynamite. He was a bit like Jai Newcomb on Friday night. Really just so hard at the footy and just in everything. Played like his life depended on it, is the way I'd describe it. And he was on 90 at halftime, which is incredible. Finished the game with 132, which is a career high score for him in fantasy. 30 touches, which he's never done that before in a game. And he took 10 marks, which he's only done once or twice. So an equal career high mark tally. Unreal. I want to see more of it in the next game for him. Just play him on the ball. Just let him do what he does, because that was outstanding. Will Setterfield had more on the ball, as I said, and he had 29 touches, scored 101. He brings that grunt. He's a big body. And I said it about him a few weeks ago. When he plays, he generally scores in fantasy. It's just whether his body stays right and whether he stays in the coach's good books in the side. As long as he's playing, he's scoring. Now, Elijah Sardis. I've been a really big believer in not necessarily him as a player, but just the idea of giving him a block of games. I don't think before this little run he'd ever played 3 full games before in his career. He'd always be the sub, or he'd play a couple of games and be dropped. And yeah, I've always just wanted to know what it is that he's not doing that just stopped him from getting these long stretches of games. And I watched him really close in this game. He scored 73. He had 25 touches. He was always around the ball, but I'm not sure he runs hard enough at times. There was one play where Sullivan Roby had it, and he kicked it. Sardis was calling for it, and Roby kicked it to him, but it went over his head. It wasn't a great kick, and there was a bit of a turnover. But I watched Sardis, and he didn't drop his head, but he sort of just jogged to the next contest, and his opponent, beat him easily. In the end, it was Roby himself who caught up with them all and laid a big tackle to get the ball back. So, yeah, I was just watching Sardis closely in that context. Is he running hard enough? And even how much he's used around the ground. I mean, I feel like he got burnt so many times by teammates who could have chipped it to him but didn't. And I wonder if it's just his disposal isn't good enough and then they don't really want the ball in his hands. Look, there's a good chance I'm overthinking a lot of this, but I've just always liked him, and I've wanted to know what the problem is. I think we saw a bit of it in this game. He just needs to run a little harder. And he didn't lay any tackles. The whole game of footy as a midfielder, you got to be laying tackles. So, yeah. But he is only, 21? Very, very young still. For Carlton, Blake Acres, spoke about him in the waiver segment, built on his strong return last week and scored 100. And same with Billy Wilson, just another really tidy game at half-back. 24 touches, 6 marks, couple of kick-ins, scored his 82. He's building nicely. And then we finished the round on King's birthday with the big freeze 12 and another close finish with Melbourne holding off Collingwood for a really important win for them. And the Pies, well, yeah, they've got some concerns, don't they? So for Collingwood, I mean, they had 65 possessions between the Dacos brothers, but lost the game. I don't reckon that happens too often. So real credit for Melbourne, to win the game despite the Dacos boys being so involved. Ed Allen had an interesting game. He had big midfield minutes because Keziah Pickett sort of got off the leash early, so they sent Ed Allen to him and he tagged him, I think, for pretty much the whole game. Scored 78 himself, and I think he did an all right job. That being said, Pickett went on to win the Neil Danaher Trophy for best on ground, but I like that they're trying something with Allen, and I think they'll persevere with it, particularly with Ned Long out of the side. I reckon Allen might be the man to play a similar role. For Melbourne, I talked about Pickett, kicked his 3 goals, and it was a nice return to form for him. He's been a little bit underwhelming in the last 4 or 5 weeks, but he's had a tough run with the Taggers, and he just loves the big stage, doesn't he, Cozzy Pickett? Yeah, he's a superstar. And then the last one, just Maxi Gawn. Really interesting what's happening with him, and for the time being, owners can breathe a sigh of relief because they had Max Heath in for a couple of weeks and it was affecting Gawn's ruck time, scoring, not a heap, but a bit. But Heath has been out of the side for 2 weeks now, and Gawn rucked solo in this game, scored 123, top scorer for the game, and played 90% time on ground, which is huge for a ruckman. Now, Max Heath had a big game in the VFL on the weekend, and Melbourne's next game is a 5-day break coming up against Essendon. So I wonder if Heath comes in to support Gawn, or if they even consider resting Gawn. I know he had a bit of a shoulder concern. Yeah, interesting to watch, but certainly Gawn showing what he does when he's alone. Absolute legend. And I actually recently, not too long ago, trade had gone out in a deal that saw me get Cherry. So long term I'm set, but for the short term, yeah, I certainly miss Big Maxi in my side. So that was round 13, one of the closest round of footy we've ever had, it would seem. So yeah, very enjoyable and as always, lots of fantasy takeaways. Now, before I jump into the listener questions, which I have a heap of this week, just a reminder, if you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure you've liked and subscribed wherever you're listening. Leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. And make sure you're following the X page at FindKeepAFL to keep up to date with everything that is happening with the podcast, and to get in touch, send your questions through, send your trades in that you want me to review on the pod like I'm about to do. So first question is a couple actually from @Ethan_Prindy. Now this was actually a couple of weeks ago. Now the first one he's written through was actually a couple of weeks ago, but I won't talk about a couple of points from it. So he'd written some trades he'd done recently. Traded out Jordan De Goey for Caleb Daniel and a late third round pick. And then he took a gamble, traded a higher third round pick to bring in Isaac Cumming. He writes, I got him off a rebuilding team. I'm right in the window. He won't play for me most weeks. How I was interested given he played off half back in his last game before getting injured. Most of my league thought I was insane, but I feel like it could be a great buy low and he could potentially get defender status in round 18 if all goes right. Was this a bit of an insane move? So look, the De Goey for Daniel one hasn't aged well because De Goey's just gone on with it in recent weeks. But I love that you took a punt, with a third round pick to bring in an Isaac Cumming, even though he was injured. Now, this was before he got re-injured, so pretty annoying for you. But I like the approach of seeing a role change without necessarily seeing a good score and jumping on it. And, it's probably not going to come off. He's injured again and who knows what comes of it. But for a third round pick, it's worth having a stab at these sorts of moves. And I like that you had a go at it. He also asks, he's had so now in his league, his trade deadline has passed, and he's asking, he says, he's had a few people wonder why I didn't sell high on Cook, that's Braden Cook, but I see a good future there, especially if he pushes further back as his career evolves. Where do you see his future lying and his scoring abilities? Braden Cook's a really interesting discussion point because it feels like his greatest value will be this year with the forward status. But I think even losing forward status next year, which he almost certainly will, I think he's still someone that you're going to want to have. Even with mid-only status, I can see him getting up to an average of 80-85 in the next couple of years, playing on that wing. But as time goes on, I could see him pushing back. Think about when Rory Laird retires or, there's going to be spots back there. The only issue with sort of predicting him to become a half-back guy is how damaging his inside 50 kicking is. So he could end up being a tricky one that is mid-only and maybe it's not enough. But I think he's a gun and I just think he's only going to get better. I think he's 23. He's been around for a while, but in terms of playing week in, week out, he's still very new. So, yeah, even as a mid-only next year, I'm pretty keen on him. In terms of selling high, I think he's a tricky one to try and sell high this year, even with the forward status, because he'd score an 80, but then he'll score a 50. And it's just bouncing back and I think most people know he's losing that forward status. Anyway, I'm glad you're holding him. I reckon he's going to go well. So thanks for sending those through, Ethan. Much appreciated as always, mate. The next one's from Fork Talk. That's at Simon Evans _76 on X. And he says, you often ask for trades to discuss for content, so I thought I'd drop you a message about 2 trades that a coach swung last week in one of my keeper leagues to set himself up for a tilt at winning the league this year. We play with 10 coaches, a 5-6-1-5-1 formation, keeper at positions, and retain 12 players plus 3 rookies per year. So these are the trades that this guy did. And it's the dates as well. So 25th of May, so a couple of weeks ago. Out was, so he gave up Jai Caldwell, Sam Banks, Nick Bryan, and a future first. And he receives Grundy, Zorko, and a future fourth. Then the next day, he trades out Jagger Smith, Trent Houghton, and a future second, and brings in Sam Flanders. Oh boy. So he goes on to say, after these trades, he ended up losing Zorko the following day for 6 weeks. Then he had Grundy rested on Thursday teams, and then finally lost Flanders for the year to an Achilles later that night. Rotten luck, but respect the willingness to trade and make a move to try and win rather than just hope to win. He's not without a chance still, but clearly this is a huge dent to his chances. Thought you may want to discuss your thoughts on the trades, the go and win it approach, and of course the terrible luck this coach had. This is brilliant, Fork Talk. There's lots in here for me to talk about. So the trades on their own, I think the first one, Grundy Zorko for Caldwell, Banks, Bryan. Yeah, I love that. I mean, you're giving up on Caldwell, who's had a shocking year. Banks, who looks like he's moved up to a wing and was injured. And Bryan, who's, a future guy for Grundy and Zorko. It's a real attack, let's win it now trade. I really like it. The next one, I reckon, is it's a little much because Jagger Smith is just such a jet, and maybe this was that little period before he was back in the midfield, but it's Jagger Smith. We all know what he's going to be. So giving him up with Houghton and a future second for Flanders, who before the injury found himself at half-back and was scoring and looking amazing. I just reckon that's a little too much. But the two combined, very ambitious trades to try and get a flag. Now, in terms of the luck, it's so brutal in keeper leagues, isn't it? You think about all the different comps that we play, the formats. Classic, a big player goes down. Chances are most people have him and he'll be worth a lot of money. You can trade him out. Single season draft is brutal because you just have to drop the gun, and but that's only going to hurt your chances for that year. The knock-on effect of some of these trades and then the injuries in a keeper league could be very could go beyond 2026 is what I'm saying. The Grundy one, yep, he was only rested for a week, but the Zorko injury is so brutal when you've given up guys like Caldwell and Banks, and then when you give up Jagger Smith for Flanders and he's starting to look the goods. And this happened to me. I did a trade a few weeks ago. I said before it involved trading out Max Gawn and getting in Cherry. And involved in that trade, there were a few names. I gave up Ed Richards and Jai Newcomb as well. And I got Flanders and Cherry. And it's just brutal. Like that, since that Flanders injury, I really think my season's just about cooked. It's just one too many long-term injuries. But back to this coach and Fork Talk who wrote in. I guess the advice would be, even though I do think he went a little hard on the Jagger Smith trade, is to not be discouraged, because you can't plan for luck. And unfortunately, these trades probably would have put this guy right at the top of that, premiership favouritism in his league. But now he'll be licking his wounds because he's lost Zorko for a long time, and Flanders for a whole 12 months. Great trades though, Fork Talks. Thanks for sending them through, mate. Really good. Now, this one's got a bit of drama to it. So it's from @StoneCuttersFC. And he sent through a trade that had been submitted in his league, but he suspected would be vetoed by the rest of the league. And then when I next spoke to him, it had been vetoed, or it looked like it was going to be. So one of the coaches quit the league. He said, that's it. You guys aren't going to let me do the trade I want to do. I'm out. Which is pretty wild in a keeper league, I'll be honest. Anyway, I guess they relented because he came back. He's back in the league, and the trade went through. So I'll tell you what the trade is. You tell me what you think. Would you have vetoed this? And I'll give my thoughts at the end. So obviously you've got a guy pushing for a flag versus a guy who has given up on the season and is looking at the future. So here's how the trade went. One side receives Connor Rozee, a second and a third round pick. And the other side receives Brad Hill, Lachie Neale, Liam Duggan, Scott Pendlebury, and Tom Stewart. So the guy that cracked it when it was vetoed is the guy receiving Rozee and the picks. So Rozee, a second and third round pick for Brad Hill, Lachie Neale, Liam Duggan, Scott Pendlebury, Tom Stewart. So this is a big trade. And I get why there would be people, like if you imagine you're pushing for a flag or you're contending and one of your biggest rivals gives up a player who's out for the year and receives, 5 older guys who are all absolute starters. Maybe not Pendlebury, but Brad Hill having a big season, has forward status. Lachie Neale, who's been fantastic. Liam Duggan starting to show a bit again. Tom Stewart, we know what he can do. And then Pendles as well is pretty handy. So I could get the idea of vetoing. But it probably raises the question, should you have a veto or should you have a commissioner to overlook any uneven trades? Is it fair for a guy to get 5 players just for one? And my question is, for the guy receiving the 5 players, he's got to delist 4 players to squeeze them all in. So I wonder, anyway. Look, I think if you, as a league, decide you're going to have the veto rule where you can vote to cancel a trade if you don't like it, if that's it, then that's how we all play. So threatening to quit the league because you don't get your way is a bit, it's an interesting approach, an effective one because he got his way. But I just think if you've got a system set up that's been agreed to by the whole league, you can't then just crack the you-know-whats if it doesn't go your way. But I don't love the veto concept myself. I don't think any of the leagues I play in have a veto rule. It's just a commissioner, well, it's me, who oversees everything. I just think you can just veto a trade because, not that you think it's unfair or uneven, just because you don't want that particular rival of yours to get a good player. I don't know. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Have you ever had anything in your league like that? 5, pretty big players for one. People said, no, that's not fair. And then someone threatened to leave. Bit of drama. But I guess it all worked out in the end. But thank you, Stonecutters. And I'll stress, Stonecutters wasn't a team involved in this. It's just in a league he plays in. So thanks, mate, for sending that through. Interesting stuff. And I'll finish with something from Maddie McClure, so at MaddieMC79 on X. And a couple of weeks ago, you might remember I talked about it might have been a week ago, the league medal on the Keeper Fantasy platform. And in my league, my main league, we renamed it the Rocky Swan Medal. And I put the call out. I said, tell me what you've named yours if you've renamed it. I reckon there's going to be some good ones out there. And sure enough, Matty's written in with one, which is a bit of a good one. So he writes, our league medal is called the Presty Medal. Back in the mid-2000s, we started our keeper league, and he was that one throwaway sort of joke pick at the end of the draft. I think he went large in one game and got a vote, and the medal is now always the Simon Prestigiacomo Medal, which I think is awesome, the Presty Medal. An ironic name for the medal there. Yeah, that's good. And, mid-2000s when you started, props to you and your mates. That's a long journey for a keeper league. I love it. So thanks for sending that through, Matt. That's a good one. Make sure you tell me. Send in what your league medals are called and the origin stories. Fascinated by it. And that is it for the listener questions this week. Big thank you to everyone that wrote in. Some really good stuff to talk through on the pod this week. And let's bring more of it. Send through your questions, send through your trades, etc. to @FindKeepAFL on X. Now, a couple of apologies, a couple of people who did write to me, and I had this issue ages ago on X, where there are a whole bunch of messages that were not messages, they were requests, because, I don't know, I'm not friends with them, or they don't follow me, I don't know how it works. But I thought I'd sorted it all out, and then I was playing with the settings today, and I stumbled across something called hidden request messages, and I looked at it, and there was a lot of very promiscuous women messaging me, which, ordinarily could be pretty cool, but no, these are all bots and, spam. But amongst all these messages of, whatever, there was a handful of messages from actual people for the pod. So apologies to those guys. I've written back to you, and in some cases you messaged 8 weeks ago. So apologies. I've responded to you now, so if you have any more questions for the podcast, please send them through. And once I've responded to all these seductive bots that have written into me, I'll get to you. I'll get to your question. Anyway, jokes aside, apologies for that. Send your questions through and you'll get them on the pod. All right, I am waffling now. It's time to wrap up another week of Finders Keepers. Apologies, it's a day late this week. It's just really hard when there's a public holiday to find the time. But thanks for listening. Been a big episode. I'll be back next week to look at round 14, another of the bye rounds, and we will be missing the Blues, the Magpies, the Hawks, and the high-flying Dockers. So get those players off your field. Good luck for the round ahead. Round 14, and if it's half as good as round 13, we're all in for a treat. But in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers, and until next time, keep on keeping on.